Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is Spencer Jones. He's a rookie with the NBA's Denver Nuggets. He's a Stanford graduate with a degree in management science and engineering. That turns out to be a degree in a lot of studies, I think, very similar to my own as an industrial engineer. So, Spencer, before I tell everyone a little bit more about you, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's great to have you here. There's a lot to talk about, about your journey, your studies, and your career, and things you want to do. I've got to mention, there's I love the numbers, right? So Spencer averaged 11 points per game in his 5 years at Stanford. That included a COVID season, right?
Yeah, a couple of them. It feels like.
Yeah, but you get that fifth year. He led the Pac-12 in three-point shooting his freshman year. He graduated as Stanford's all-time leader in threes, and that was after winning three high school state championships in Kansas. And I'm going off memory here from your bio. Shawnee Mission, Kansas, is that right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
So when I was in my math science geek program in high school in suburban Detroit, there was some sort of national nerd competition, I'm going to call it. And it was either Shawnee Mission East or Shawnee Mission West was like our nemesis because they were always like just above us in the
Yeah,
rankings.
sounds like it. Sounds like it would have been East. Sounds like that probably would have been East.
So we have connections here other than me having no basketball skills. But Spencer has passions that extend beyond basketball. He's deeply interested in the intersections of sports, health, and technology. And Spencer's actively building his brand in the health tech space. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about in terms of interests in investing and business and all. So I was going to kind of jokingly, like, I'm glad that you can come on a show and not require like that big arena introduction. At forward, I don't quite have the voice for it. At forward, 6'7"
Yeah.
from Stanford, but again, Spencer Jones. I will stop goofing around there. So. The big question, as we always start off with, Spencer, what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, I'd say my favorite mistake was in college. I had the unique situation of kind of coming in college in 2019, which was pretty much the last regular time, regular kind of time for college athletics because obviously COVID hit that spring in 2020. So I had a glimpse of what, I had a glimpse of what regular, what college was in the past. And then, you see it evolve through 5 years to 2023 to what it's been. And so having gone through all those years, it's kind of been interesting to navigate that. And part of that was obviously a big part of that change was the NIL stuff. And, a big reason that was such a huge change is because, the sports that benefited the most, football, volleyball, basketball, stuff like that, they're very team-centric, team-oriented sports. While, this whole idea of name, image, likeness, very individualized. And so my mistake was, along with kind of, figuring out with Stanford, which is also, very bureaucratic place. So it took us a minute to also adjust. But it was just kind of figuring out how to navigate building my brand while also, feel like I'm representing myself well and not taking away from the basketball piece. And I was kind of intimidated by that idea of is building my brand and focusing too much on the individual. Is that going to be perceived well, especially in a place like Stanford where I want to be perceived well with fans and coaches and everything like that? Is that going to be perceived well? And so that kind of caused me to falter a little bit and, not evolve with the changes. And, as a result, like you only get a couple years, you only get like 4 or 5 years of college to really capitalize on that. And I did eventually towards the end, but I'm thinking I lost out on, maybe a year or two and stuff like that. And so why it's my favorite mistake is that as soon as I kind of, found my footing in the NBA, signed with the Nuggets, I've been since building my brand for after, because it's kind of the same thing. I mean, people don't realize the average NBA career is, 4 or 5 years pretty much as well. And now after learning that mistake, it's, how can I capitalize on, the image of being an NBA player? And obviously I keep the main thing first. I always get, my basketball and my workouts and everything done first. But outside of that, I'm not really as fearful of the perception of me building something outside of that. So.
Well, it's really interesting, and is that for people who aren't familiar, if you can talk a little bit first about the name, image, and likeness opportunities for an athlete. You can sign endorsement deals, you can sign partnerships with companies to get paid directly in a way that wasn't possible before. Could you
Yeah,
tell us a
absolutely.
little
I
bit more
mean,
about that?
there's two parts to the NIL stuff these days. I mean, it's really split in collectives and NIL. Collectives is pretty much just the university or really alumni in the university building funds to kind of pay the players to, basically play for the school. And then NIL itself is more of the branding stuff, you advertising company products or, doing camps and stuff like that, just using your image in order to, attract some extra funds to yourself.
And so then is I'd like to hear more about that dynamic. You're on a team. There's what 15
Yeah.
players
About 50
roughly.
basketball. Yeah, absolutely.
And depending on your profile, and imagine after that first season, leading the Pac-12
Mm.
in threes, you might have had more. I mean, is there a question of like equity of opportunities of how are some players going to react if they're not getting opportunities that
Yeah, so
you
it
and other
was.
starters might get?
Yeah, this is where Stanford kind of was a little behind the trend on that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of it was just interesting. I remember it starts like 2021 where that collective start stuff, all that collective stuff started. Sorry. And what Stanford did the first year actually was they paid every. We were kind of the trial run for
Uh-huh.
paying athletes then because basketball's the smallest team pretty much on all the sports. And so they paid everybody the same. I think it was around like 50,000 or something like that per person.
Uh-huh.
They paid everybody the same. And that was like that was like the first year anybody did. So we had no idea what was really going on. Then this was like my June, this was my junior or senior year. Then the next year, which was my last year, leading into that's when it differed. And
Uh-huh.
Stanford was a bit more mature about it, and we had great relationships with all the players and stuff like that. But I was getting significantly more than like some of the other guys, and albeit that was also an interesting decision because I could have graduated in 4 years and
Uh-huh.
been done. I kind of wanted to coast my fifth year, so I just pushed off some classes. But that was after I decided I was staying.
Yeah.
I was courted by some other, although I wasn't quite in the ever entered my name in the portal. I was hit up by some entities who supported some of the other schools and stuff like that, and so I knew I could make a substantial amount more leaving than staying at Stanford. But I figured the alumni base, the connections, and everything with that would take me much farther than a couple extra 5 or 6 figures.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds pretty clear it wasn't a mistake to stay.
No, no,
But I was curious. The other change along with NIL and the collectives is the ability to transfer without having to sit out a year. That's changed things. High profile ways, especially in football, men's basketball, women's basketball. Did you lose anybody to the portal because someone did leave? Maybe with their degree already or otherwise.
Yeah, no, we would lose a decent amount of people. The typical way was that they would still see the value in the degree. So a
Mhm.
decent amount of players would they'd try to graduate early, 3.5 years, 4 years, or whatever. But after they graduate, they would move on to go because like I got my degree, let's go make a little bit extra money. So we definitely lost some people. The hard part was that being Stanford, we have a much smaller pool on people we can grab from
Mhm.
the transfer portal to enhance our team. So we are still kind of old school in that we have to build it from the ground up. We can't really be as reliant on the transfer portal as a lot of schools and everything are. So it's a little bit different, but it's interesting seeing it that way.
Yeah, I think Northwestern, following NU sports as an alum, there's a guideline. The university, if somebody transfers in as an undergraduate, you have to earn at least half of your credits at Northwestern to get a Northwestern degree. So that really limits. They can only,
Yeah,
football for next year has someone coming in after their freshman year
you got
at
to get
another school, and then it's either that or basically graduate transfer.
credit.
Like that rule kind of puts Northwestern at a disadvantage in addition to like Stanford would have admissions
Exactly.
guidelines.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one for sure.
So it's a whole new ball game, if you will, and this is always changing. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more. Like you shared some concern, Spencer, about the locker room dynamics as
Yeah.
things shifted. How did that play out? Do is that something to manage that work out?
I mean, it's definitely something for other schools to manage much more. I mean, like I said, you get a certain type of individual when you go to Stanford. I mean, yes, we had some guys who were definitely not super excited or didn't like the idea of earning far less, but we understood where it was coming from. We understood kind of how the system worked and everything like that. And so you see it very plainly. You're able to
Yeah.
take kind of most of the emotions out of it. I mean, a lot of my friends at other schools though have much deeper problems where a kid will sign, then he'll find out another player is making more, and then you got arguments with the coach and stuff like that, and then it kind of stems from that. That's why a lot of these schools are, speak about the value of just having pretty much just making an extra position for like just the GM, just run this as a professional team and just run it that way because the coach already has on top of a million other responsibilities. Like he can't really be that involved with the business side of this and, try to run his team as well. So that's where you see is like, eventually they're going to have to start running these teams like professional sports, especially with you got private equity, looking to dip its toe into the market. It'll be, it's been a lot of changes in the last, 3-5 years and it's just going to keep going.
Yeah, because there's been, I think I've seen headlines. I'm sure you know more about this. Private equity possibly making investments in, I think the Big 12 was the one
I'm pretty sure
conference that somehow read about.
Yeah, it was like one of them. Yeah, I mean they're trying to get the SEC as well, but yeah, I think Big 12 has made the most progress. I feel like as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear about what it was like being a student athlete at Stanford and kind of balancing time between those pressures. I knew some athletes at Northwestern who they were up at early morning practices, and I thought it was bad going to a 9 a.m. class. They had already done so much more in the day. I'm just curious to hear like lessons you learned about balancing things as you're having to do now in the pros.
Yeah. The biggest thing was, taking out kind of all the time wasting activities. Like as soon as I got to college, I kind of found out pretty quickly I was going to have to let go of the video games if I wanted to, have a little bit of all three in terms of, a solid academic, solid academic score, being good at train enough to be good at athletics and then have some semblance of a social life on top of that. I really had to get rid of all the time wasting activities. And, it took me a bit, but then also like just planning out my day kind of hour by hour, because I'm kind of a guy who kind of likes to not know exactly what my day goes on. I kind of like the spontaneity of it. But after a while, you realize, how much you can actually get done and how much more you can schedule free time and stuff like that when you actually schedule it hour by hour. That was a big thing. And then, but either way, you always ran into some issues, especially if you were especially taking a STEM major. There's a lot of times where, we're taking flights back from Oregon or, Utah, Colorado, where I'm having to stay up late on that flight, finishing an assignment. And there are tons of situations where I literally had to choose: did I want to get a full night's of rest sleep leading into the next game, or did I want to sacrifice that to maybe fix a couple issues on the problem set, even though I might get a passing grade, so there was always a couple times where where that conflict came into it, and you just kind of had to decide what was best for you. And it was interesting. I didn't project myself to be an NBA player, NBA caliber, until like halfway through. So the first half was kind of focusing more on the school stuff, and the second half was like, well, as long as I keep my GPA, my goal is just keep it above a 3 or, make it decent. So it actually looks like I was a student. But on top of that, like I want to focus on, because the basketball is going to be right after. And everybody always talks about how like, a lot of jobs aren't really going to be that concerned about my GPA as long as it's, as long as it's a solid one. So the last half was a little bit more basketball focused.
So that's an interesting pathway. It's probably a lot more common athletes coming in overestimating
exactly
their chances of making the pros and sports like basketball, football, the percentages are really small. even
Yeah, no,
players who are
the
top
goal for
performers
me
in
was
college.
just, I come from an academic family, so it was always go to the good school first. The funny thing was going through that whole recruiting in high school system was, most kids will choose a school based on the schools that reach out to them and be like, all right, these are my pickings. My parents kind of did different. Because we knew I had, the grades to get into good schools. So we kind of applied to schools that I fairly confident I could get into. And then out of that pool of what I got into, that was kind of the baseline. And then, my parents were like, if you're going to go to school, for basketball or anything like this, it's got to be on par academically with what you can get into. So, I still had to I still had to do that whole regular college admissions process as if I was not an athlete and stuff.
Yeah. And I'm not going to give you grief, or I don't know. Did you ever talk to Northwestern? Because we compete with
Actually,
Stanford and Duke
no.
and Vanderbilt.
Ironically, I thought I was going to go to Northwestern.
Yeah.
What happened was, so we won 3 state championships. We didn't win it my senior year, so I missed out on the four-peat. And that game that we lost, it was sometime in that tournament. I forget exactly where, like semifinals, quarterfinals, something like that. That was the game they came to come see me and decide whether they're going to offer me. And we lost the game. They didn't end up offering, and yeah,
Oh,
I know.
Northwestern's lost.
I'm happy.
Northwestern.
I'm happy where I
I
am.
don't know. Yeah.
I'm happy where
Yeah,
I am.
but I think to your point, when it comes to the academics and schools like Stanford, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, Duke are competing nationally for recruits, and that's and now you talk about the other change. You've got Stanford students now having to travel all the way to the East Coast for ACC games,
Yeah,
and that travel creates a new burden, right?
absolutely. Yeah, I've been wanting to reach out to the guys who have been doing that. I'll be up there. I'll be up there around my break during All Star weekend, so I'll be able to see the real effect on that. But the travel, like I said, the travel is already tough. Where I had to, do a lot of my assignments on the plane, so I can imagine adding, the 2-3 hour time difference on top of two flights that are 2 hours longer and probably 4 hours total. So
Yeah,
it's definitely something they're gonna have to navigate.
yeah. I'll ask one other question, about the management science and engineering piece. I'm just curious, what drew you to that major and these operations research, and there's a lot of quantitative,
Yeah,
interesting topics from my history and perspective.
it was an interesting way that I got there at first. So my dad's a doctor, my grandfather was a surgeon, so I always wanted to do health, but I didn't want to be a doctor. So I wanted to look at it from both the business / the engineering side. So first, initially, I thought I was going to do biomedical engineering, and then, you go through a summer of workouts and realize how much time you got to devote to this basketball stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be good at it. So
Yeah.
I was like, maybe that one's a little hard. So actually, originally, I kind of did the management science and engineering one because it was if athletes did engineering, it was one that a decent amount did, because it was a bit more flexible on the classes you could choose and stuff like that. And so the flexibility is kind of what brought me to it. But then it was somewhat similar to a business major in terms of I was learning a lot of business principles and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, I'll just segue this into learning from the business side of health. And there was some business health class, although I couldn't really fully major minor and something health specific. There were plenty of health specific classes I could take within that major that kind of sufficed. And so that's kind of what I got into it, while also, learning about classic supply chain operations and optimization, stuff like that. So it was, no, it actually covered a lot of interest for me, and I liked how wide ranging it was.
Yeah. And somebody in one of those classes could probably run an optimization model looking at the current Stanford ACC conference scheduling and
Yeah,
trying to maximize the games with minimizing travel. That's a good optimization function.
yeah. I'm curious how well they figured that out, because that's
Yeah.
a tough one.
Yeah. So being at Stanford, and I imagine this is especially in a NIL era, part of the draw is proximity to Silicon Valley, or
Absolutely.
being in Silicon Valley. From your experience, or from others, did being there open up other opportunities for learning about tech companies, investing, or even having players like Steph Curry or Kevin Durant in
Yeah.
the area were
No,
so involved
absolutely.
in
No,
business?
it was big in all of those. Actually, you touch on Steph. Steph would come, and because he lives in Atherton, which is like 10, 15 minutes away, I think. Yeah, no, he trains at Stanford in the summer.
Hmm.
So I was actually able to train a couple times with this trainer, and then watch Steph train and stuff like that. And it was incredible to watch him work. The guy's never always running. I tried to hop in there for a little bit, and I was about to throw up after like 15, 20 minutes, and I was in good shape at the time. Like I was in good shape for a college athlete. So it just shows you how much different he is, and also how specific he is in terms of, it's the first time I've ever seen somebody like consistently track their heart rate as they're working out, because there's a certain amount of time he wants to spend in different zones of his in certain zones of how fast your heart's beating. And so that was interesting to see how hyper specific everything is and how detailed it is. It really kind of changed how I worked out after watching him. So on the basketball side, you get that, which is great. Yeah, the Silicon Valley side is huge in terms of just the connections and stuff. We always have honorary captains and stuff like that. I remember the former CEO of Yahoo was an honorary captain. A bunch of people who run VC firms were honorary captains, and that was something like, you don't realize your first 2 years, and then your last 2 years when you're starting to think, hey, when am I getting out of this place? Then you start to snoop around and be like, oh yeah, there's this many people I can reach out to. The thing is like, I kind of like it as in like, they're not going to do the work for you in terms of the networking. Like you still have to go out and do it yourself, which is, part of the value of networking, is figuring out how to do that. But once you do, like, they're all ears and everything like that. And so I've built a great connection base, and it's made me ever confident that, when the ball inevitably stops bouncing, there's something out there for me.
Yeah. And as you're getting into the MBA and talking to your teammates and meeting people on a different level, how much interest is there in topics like investing, not just in financial instruments, but in companies and startups? It seems like there's a new era of players going far beyond like shoe contracts and endorsements. Like LeBron has so many business interests. Steph Curry, not too far south of where I am in Northern Kentucky, he's got a partnership with a bourbon brand.
Yeah,
but I know he's involved in a lot of tech companies, kind of going beyond. Like Magic Johnson, I think was an early example, but that I think was post career.
Yeah.
Business ventures, perhaps. So what's the landscape and the amount of interest, and how much people want to talk about things like that instead of, let's say, playing video games?
Yeah, I mean, no, there's big interest in it. It's just it's tough, when you're, for some athletes to, because they're so used to being. What I found is like so many athletes are so, like they've grown in a place where they've always been confident in their sport. They've always been the best. They've always been so confident in it. So it's like when they dip their toe in investing and stuff like that, they start to get less confident. And they're interested, but it's kind of like that fear, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'll either hand it off to somebody, I'm interested in it, want to learn about it, but they're hesitant because of that lack of confidence that they're so used to in their sport and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like some of my teammates, especially down in the G League, will ask me stuff about that, and like I can it's like their tone and temperament completely changes from how I interact with them on the court, just because of that lack of confidence. But the willingness to be educated is absolutely there. I think I think it'll be great, because you'll really, I feel like the next 10, 15 years, you'll really start to see the rates of the classic football, basketball player going bankrupt shortly after they're retiring. I feel like those rates are going to significantly drop. One, because you can make money in college now, and also that with the NBA signing a new media rights deal, the contracts are going to be big, huge. But on top of that, like, people are going to be wanting to invest before they get to their post career and stuff like that. And so it's huge. A lot of guys have management teams and investing groups and stuff looking out for them. I have a couple, and so it's a huge interest, and everybody's kind of looking into it. Everybody, there's much more emphasis and willingness and a much better perception now than there was then on building a legacy and starting that as soon as possible. I remember going to the NBA, the NBPA, which is the Players Association for the NBA. They have a rookie training program for all the rookies coming in. It was right before the season starts a few months ago. They take us all to I think it was Brooklyn, New York, or downtown New York, where where the headquarters are, and it's pretty much like 3-4 days of just kind of introducing you. It's pretty much onboarding for the NBA in terms of everything you face. Like, and they were pretty candid. Like, even with the relationship, women's side. Like they had some guys, drugs and stuff. Like they were very candid on the kind of stuff you can run into. But a big part of it was, I'll never forget, like Jaylen Brown was one that was like, hey, he's huge on building the legacy. You'll hear him talk about trying to build that Black Wall Street, with his lucrative contracts and everything like that, really trying to build up the community, which was great. And he made the comment like, you guys should start thinking about that, diving into it like now, like as your career starts, because like I said, you're not going to know how long it lasts, and it's hard. The more you wait, the harder it is to do, especially when you're on the outside looking in. So
yeah. Well, it's good to hear. I was going to ask what kind of resources are made available. A couple of years ago, I interviewed a friend of mine, Lenny Walls, who he played in the NFL for 5 or 6 years, and he was talking about how those rookie, financial seminars and onboarding was only made available to drafted players, and Lenny was undrafted, and he was, I think, part of a group lobbying and saying, hey, if someone's sticking in the league, whether they were drafted or not, they need that same, kind of same guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially nowadays where, a lot of guys are coming from different starting points these days. Like I know I when we were up there, like they were really trying to try to destigmatize the G League these days, just because a lot of players end up playing in the G League just because there's such an influx of talent than there was decades ago. And there's a much more emphasis on using the G League teams as development, as opposed to like demotion type stuff. So it's like I think 70% at least of players who have played in the NBA, like right now, have spent at least some time in the G League. I know my draft class specifically has had a lot of guys who have been even like top 10 picks. Like they've been sent down, not because they've necessarily played horrible, just because the opportunity isn't quite there for them yet, but it will be in the future. So it's huge to know that they're finally, encompassing all different types of routes to get there, and kind of, making it all accessible.
Yeah, and real quick for people who might not know, the G League, which used to be called the D League, as Spencer called it, developmental league. There's a Gatorade sponsorship some years ago. It's now the G League, but that used to be a role played by the CBA, the old Continental Basketball Association, where it's that tier below. Feel rude saying it, but below the NBA, I guess. But I guess there's this balance, this question of like, if somebody isn't getting a lot of minutes on their NBA team, they might get sent to the G League team just to get more action and until the time is right, as you were saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in my case, when you're on a championship caliber team like the Denver Nuggets, who have a shorter rotation than most other teams. We only play really consistently like 8 or 9 guys, versus like some of the teams that are, if you're not as good, you'll play maybe like 10 or 11 or 12, but like there's 15 guys on the team. So that means like half your team's not really playing consistently. And especially if you're younger, new to the team, they just want to send you down just to be like, hey, play, develop, so you can be ready to fill in the role, eventually, which is whether it's a year or two or so. And that happens in all situations. Like I said, there are draft picks right now. I know like Reed Shepherd for the Rockets, who's a top 3 pick, got sent down to the G League, not because he was playing bad, just because, the teams that playing really well, top 3 seed, they have their rotation set and everything like that, but they still want him to develop. They don't want him just sitting on the bench and, not gaining any skill or value really. So,
yeah. And, with college students going into the NBA or the WNBA, NFL, there's other leagues players get drafted out of, but it's kind of that rare situation where people are thrilled to have that opportunity, but then you're told where you're going to go play, unlike college where you're getting to choose, and it's kind of a unique situation. What's the pathway, or what happens when you're a free agent coming out of school? That is that in a different, more similar to a college recruiting dynamic, trying to find the right fit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just thinking how specific I want to go on this. I can kind of talk about my way into the league, because I wouldn't classify myself as a free agent, but it kind of worked a little bit like that. So in terms of basically for the audience, there's 60 draft picks available, 2 rounds, but those aren't the full spots available. Every team has what they call these two-way contracts, which are players that know they will bounce back. They're still employed by the main team, but they bounce back and forth between the main team and the G League team. And I'm on one of those two-way contracts, and each team has 3 of those. Some of them might be filled, some of them might not be filled. So it's not 60 guys in that rookie class. It really ends up being about 90. So there's like the 30 extra guys who are kind of like those free agent signings and stuff like that. So typically what happens is you're kind of, for me, I was kind of told my range. I was going to be either late second round or in that kind of undrafted two-way spot. And so it kind of works free agency there where it's like after you're picked, I think it's after pick about 45 or something like that. All those contracts below are pretty much those two-way contracts. So then you're kind of incentivized to choose your situation because, you're getting the same contract. So it doesn't really matter. So that's where the free agency was a little bit. Like I had an offer to get drafted late in the second round, but the contract wasn't great, or the details of it weren't great. So I opted not to get picked by that team. And then after the draft ended, I was pretty. It's kind of like college where teams would be like, "Hey, we're willing to give him this contract. We're willing to give him this two-way." And then I kind of chose Denver just because I thought for my skills and what they might need, I thought there was a fit there.
Yeah, I imagine there's all kinds of dimensions and interests of playing time.
Exactly.
How good is the team? Like, I mean, everyone wants that ring, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, there's a caveat. With the ring could come less playing time. With more playing time comes more opportunity, and more opportunity, you can get a bigger contract sooner. So there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of, I think for those of us in other careers, there's often questions around choosing a job, switching companies of like long-term versus short-term. And it sounds like you've had a lot of those decisions. It seems like you've been thinking about and making decisions for the long term.
Yeah. No, that's been a huge thing for me. Like I said, ever since I started, I'm hopeful to have at least, a 10-year career or something like that. But, I'm also planning hedging bets against having a 3-year career, a 5-year career, always having, some sort of outlet, which is kind of contradictory to what they kind of tell you, especially in a sport, where it's just kind of like, we praise the guys that, I don't want to say came from nothing, but came from bad backgrounds or came from nothing, where it's like, this was the only option. This was the only way I was going to make it. It was my only option. And yes, that, kind of grind and that only having one option will certainly bring something out of you. But I don't know, I kind of argue that having other options outside of it has made me a better basketball player. Because when I go to the gym, I don't really have these distractions off the court because I'm not worried about them. So it's just, I can fully invest myself into the team, fully invest myself in the sport because I want this to work out. That is the one option I really want to work out. Right. But yeah, for a lot of coaches, I know my LinkedIn presence and being so active in other companies and as an advisor and ambassador and doing the investment opportunities that I publicize and stuff like that. I know there's going to be a certain perception on, is he fully invested in it? I've been told as going through the draft process that the Stanford prospect does have a little bit of a stereotype to it in terms of he has other options. So it's like, devoted is he going to be to it? I don't know to what extent they're true, but I know they're definitely out there in some people's minds. And so that was something I just had to kind of just get over and be like, this is what I want to do. This is what's best for me. And, it's, it's funny. I've already been called a know-it-all, by my G League coach, but I think that's more just I can test, some of our like strategies and stuff like that just to get better clarity. But also because of the Stanford thing and because I'm like, I'll be like the only one reading books on the plane and stuff like that. You're just doing things a little differently. It comes with a stigma, but it's one that I'll gladly take.
Yeah, well, I'm sure coaches I lived in San Antonio for a long time and big fan of that team. Greg Popovich, who's still coaching, might find that all really engaging and a big plus. So, but you're in Denver, so yeah, wish you great success with the Nuggets, and better prospects for this year than with the Spurs. But back to LinkedIn. So after we talked, after you reached out about coming on the podcast, and thank you for doing that.
No problem.
Connected with you on LinkedIn. I encourage other people to follow or connect, because it has been really interesting to read your posts about some of the business side of the NBA and being a player, and writing about your other interests. There's probably a lot more players on Instagram than LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm not a big social media guy. I've never really been. What really started the whole LinkedIn thing was, like I said, at Stanford, your last 2 years, you're kind of thinking, what do I get out of this place? And like I said, I made the decision to go to Stanford because I wanted the academics as well as the athletics, and I knew I was going to be playing professional basketball afterward. But I was like, in 5 years down the line, it's like, it's going to be weird connecting to alumni who I haven't stayed in touch with. And, although I was doing it individually, I was like, this is a better way to do it on like a mass scale, to keep presence of mind kind of. So yeah, I created that, and, connected with alumni, and felt like that was a good way to stay in touch. And then I ended up writing some articles, like I said, my unique perspective of going through kind of like the whole changes in college sports, seeing it change every single year differently in my 5 year time. And then that blew up. And then, then I just kept posting, and then some opportunities came. I was being offered jobs, and I was like, I'm not looking for work yet. I'm still playing basketball. And so, yeah, it kind of just blew up from there. And then I just also decided, like, there's a huge gap missing on professional athletes kind of having a presence there. I mean, a lot of the big ones will, but, they tend to have somebody else kind of,
Yeah.
most of that for them. And you can kind of tell. But yeah, I saw just a missing gap in that. And it was also a platform that I felt comfortable with, and I actually wanted to use, because it felt like it has, not that other platforms don't have it, but LinkedIn is much more substance than it is just, getting the followers and getting everything else. It's like the people on there are really, change makers and everything like that. And these are the people you want to be talking to if you have other interests. And yeah, it's kind of exploded from there. I've had investment opportunities, tons of companies reach out. My network's vastly expanded since being on there, and it's been great. It's been fantastic.
And then it was also fun, though, as the sports fan, seeing the video of you and teammates celebrating the game when you scored your first NBA points. So that's a pretty cool thing to be able to share.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was great. The vets have been fun. My vets, Russell Westbrook and DeAndre Jordan. They, you definitely have your fair share of rookie duties to do, but they make it work.
Yeah. So LinkedIn and other things that you're doing, you talked earlier about not wanting to repeat your mistake from college. So it sounds like you're on that path of going ahead and pursuing different things, and not kind of letting some of those opportunities sit there untapped like you did at first at Stanford.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I'm far less worried about the perception of it. I am definitely 100% into the basketball piece and making that work as possible. But, if anybody wants to know, I'm at the point where no one would have any reliable evidence to suggest that I'm not fully committed in that. So then that just gives me the confidence to do, outside of it, do what I need to do to preserve my personal growth and make sure I'm ready for what's next.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it sounds like not just being ready for it, but creating what comes next.
Absolutely.
During this phase and beyond.
Yeah. No, my favorite thing to do has been advising and being kind of like an ambassador. Because the big thing was, like, I'm in the NBA now. I have this huge brand. I can really help companies maybe a little bit more. And so the big thing is, like, I hope to do something in the health and sports tech space. So what I've been doing is pairing kind of with companies that have a product that can help me now with my athletic performance, while also kind of learning, how that product comes to fruition, how it's built, how it's marketed, stuff like that. So, like, like one company, for example, is I had a surgery after my last season in college, and this company, has an electric stimulus wearable that. That they pretty much created for me, and I get to learn about the company, and while also kind of, getting the last few bits of my my wrist all good. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's right. Um, well, that's very cool. And wanted to ask maybe as we wrap up here. Well, I was going to say, talk about being an advisor and um, being right out of college. You're the second youngest guest that I've had
Oh,
on
really?
the podcast. The youngest was a Stanford undergraduate student
Really? Look at that. We
about a
love
year and a half
that.
ago. Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said we love the representation.
Yeah, so Sophie Rue, she was 19-year-old sophomore when she was on the show. So yeah, there's that Stanford connection. You overachievers and know-it-alls.
We try our best.
One final question I want to ask Spencer. It's been interesting talking to athletes because I think there's more experience with failure and mistakes and having to be resilient. I'm curious what your thoughts about potentially making a mistake that a lot of people see from the stands or on TV. Like you don't want to be a not top 10 on Sports Center,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, no, I think what makes athletes great is that they're kind of like founders in terms of we are like egotistical, but like also willing to change at the same time because
mhm,
you have to adapt to the situation, everything like that. But you also have to be confident enough in yourself to perform at a high level. So that kind of makes us like a healthy delusional at a healthy level. Like, and I've always had the theory that like the best players are kind of like the most delusional. They have to be because it's like
yeah,
especially as like your clock's winding down, you got 3 seconds left. You're trying to do a move that maybe you haven't practiced all that often, stuff like that.
mhm,
But you're delusional in terms of like it hasn't worked out that often, and I just have to make it work. And I'm still confident in making that shot despite whatever's going on. And it's also like like as a 3-point shooter, I'm missing more times than I'm making it. Yet I'm confident that I'm going to make every shot. That's statistically, mathematically speaking, that's pretty delusional. That's pretty delusional. But I mean, that's what makes us great is that the fact that despite odds being against it, failing numerous times, we'll always have that kind of perseverance and always have that delusional kind of confidence, but in a healthy way.
yeah,
I think that's what made athletes so special and why why they can connect to founders pretty well.
yeah. It's a fine line between confident and
Yes,
delusional.
yes, but we know how to navigate it. We know how to navigate it, or at least most of us do.
But you hear about shooters, especially like you have to have a short memory and some.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Hopefully, you've never had a game like this, but let's say you're 0 for 10,
Oh yeah.
and you think that 11 shot's going to go. That kind of
Exactly.
stuff.
That's part of the delusional part. I've had plenty of games like that where I've missed my first 5 shots, but you keep shooting it, and all of a sudden you end as like 6 for 11. You made the last six or whatever. I've had that happen a bunch of times, but a lot of people are really once you miss those first 5, you're gonna think I'm not really gonna it's not my night and stuff like that, and you can't really be like that. You have to, despite how you're performing, you still have to do what your role is. And if that's shooting, you got to shoot the ball.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of great lessons for that are going to serve you in your career, and thank you for sharing that for those of us who are listening, and now in some cases getting to watch you perform. So I'm excited to see how not only your MBA career takes root, but your business career. So it's going to be exciting to follow you, and thank you. It's really great to meet you through the podcast here.
Absolutely, I had a great time today, man. It was perfect.
All right. Well, thanks. So again, we're joined today by Spencer Jones. Look in the show notes for links if you want to follow what Spencer's writing and doing on LinkedIn, and encourage everyone to do that. So again, thanks so much.